Hello, good morning. Morning. People who use normal time are here, and people who use Italian time are on the way. And they're coming now. Good. Hello, good morning. So welcome here for the second day of our seminar, and those of you who went to Sistina Chapel with us yesterday evening, we experienced quite an adventurous journey there, and then quite a wet journey back. I don't know if you had the same experience, but I have totally wet shoes still. Now, yeah, you have the same experience. So maybe we can agree to take our shoes off. Yeah. Do you agree? Okay. Okay. Yesterday we had a series of lectures that were more general. It was kind of an introduction to the topic of research in Gestalt therapy. And today and tomorrow we will have examples of methodologies that can be applied in Gestalt therapy field. And I'm very glad to welcome Christine Stevens here. And should I say something about you?
Interesting.
She's from Britain, and she's the chief editor of British Gestalt Journal. And what else? Okay. Christine, welcome here, and I'm very glad you will present to us.
Thank you very much, Jan. Can you hear me if I speak into this? Can you hear me at the back? Well, it's lovely to be here. What a treat to be in Rome. Thank you very much, the organisers, for organising this seminar and for having it here. I'm really enjoying being here, and really enjoyed Sistine Chapel last night. It's just amazing, amazing treasure. And thank you for your introduction, Jan. So I do edit the British Gestalt Journal, which I imagine most of you have seen. And I'm also, my experience in research is I'm on the faculty of 2 doctoral programs in Metanoia in London. These are work-based doctorates in psychotherapy, not only Gestalt, but a lot of Gestalt. We seem to get a lot of Gestalt candidates come through. One is in doctorate in professional studies, and the other one is a doctorate in public works. And actually, Ken Evans is one of our graduates from that program. And so, at any one time, I have about eight doctoral students that I'm advising, supporting through the program. And many of the students are using qualitative methods, many but not all. It depends on what they're looking at. And so I'm very involved one way or another with research methods. I co-teach the program on research methods there. And I'm co-editing a book called Research Matters, which is based on the experience of people coming through the program. So I think that, so you might gather from that, I think actually research is very exciting. It's an exciting thing to do. I was struck by Margarita saying that it's about love. I think that's a lovely way to look at it. And I'm particularly excited by new developments in research and so many methods that are available to us and ways of working that are very compatible with the way that we do therapy. Even though quite a lot of research, as I'll be talking about this morning, it's not all sexy. Sometimes it's just hard graft, and there's that part to it as well. So my plan is quite a long, we've got the morning together doing this, and I thought you'd like to know what I had in mind for us, because I'm not proposing to talk to you for 3 hours, but you'll be glad to hear. But I do want to, first of all, I'm going to be interested in a minute to hear what experience is in the room with CORE, the CORE outcome measure, because I think there is quite a lot, so that would be good to find out. And then I'm going to share with you some of our experience on the project that we did in the UK. I'm not going to go into great depth about the intricacies of the method, because you can read that in the article that we published in the British Gestalt Journal, and we can talk about that if you need that. But it's more to, I want you to, if you don't already, to have a real feel for what CORE is and what it does and doesn't do. And then we're going to spend some time just actually hands-on doing the CORE measurement. I don't know how many of you downloaded the CORE measurement form. Someone at the back. Oh, a few of you. Oh, brilliant. That's because I did actually send it quite late, so well done if you've got it. I've got about 20 here, and I've also, I think I've managed to put it on PowerPoint, so between us we can do this. So that would be good, and we can see what it's like to do it for ourselves. I think we shouldn't do things for clients, give things to clients that we haven't experienced ourselves. And I think it will give us some information then to be able to discuss. And I'd like to spend the rest of the time really discussing, I'm not sure whether we'll do that in groups or as a whole, we'll see, about what we think about CORE, what our experience is with it, both here and for those of you that are already using it or looking at using it, and whether it might be something worthwhile to put energy in on a pan-European collaboration in Gestalt. So that's the programme. Is that okay? So who is actually using CORE in your practice in the room? Is anybody actually using it? Is that a hand? So is that not yourself, but in your programme? So that's in Serbia. And where are you from? In Italy. Yes, Margarita was saying that you're using it in Italy and Serbia, and anywhere else. Where in your country?
Sheffield.
In Sheffield. And some of you have said to me that you are looking at it or you're getting it translated. So who of you are looking at it seriously? I know Sweden, yes?
Well, we are connected to Linköping University with a professor who has a lot of money for CORE project, and he's writing it already. It's up and running with all different modalities in Sweden, and he is invited his daughter to come along. So we're just starting up.
So you're very well situated to have academic support, university support.
I'm from Norway at University College NB, Norwegian Gestalt Institute, and we are also on the beginning of starting using it now, also translating it in Norwegian.
In Norwegian.
But we're in the really beginning of it.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think you said it was being translated into Czech.
Yeah, it's about the translation is about to be finished.
That's really interesting.
I know that Diana has a lesson with also British, but also there is a university in Serbia which is also using this CORE1 and has its own presentation. So
Okay.
we have several points where it is.
So as the university, they didn't hear at the back, so university in Serbia is using it as well, yeah.
In Italy, we are starting to use CORE in Gestalt Association.
Okay, so it's interesting that there's not a lot of hands-on experience here, so that's quite helpful to know, but there's quite a lot of knowledge about it, and a number of projects is starting up, seems to be the impression. Okay, so just to tell you a bit about how we got into this in the UK. One of the things, Phil Brownell was telling us about his experience in the States yesterday, and it's similar really in many ways in the UK, and I think probably throughout Europe, that we were finding that a lot of practitioners in the Gestalt community were working in the state sector, but not as Gestalt practitioners. So they were working as psychiatric nurses or as psychological therapists or psychologists. And data was being collected on their work as part of their team. But people weren't being able to get jobs as Gestalt modality, and B, the data that they were collecting as Gestalt practitioners wasn't, although their data was being collected often, we couldn't look at it as Gestalt data. And this was a problem because other modalities were being very active. I mean, we know about CBT, but other modalities as well were being very active in establishing an evidence base for their modality, which was one of the things that we were up against, that we didn't have an evidence base for our work. And one of the things that we thought that we would do would be to participate, after some discussion, we thought we would participate in a research project in the Gestalt community in the UK that would enable us to actually have some evidence that we could then talk to other modalities, that we could publish, that we could sort of put into the debate. And of course, it's quite difficult. People are quite resistant. We ourselves were quite resistant. We kind of felt that we, were doing a good job, that our clients were mostly liking what we did. Mick Cooper has written a really interesting book called Essential Research Findings in Counselling and Psychotherapy. It's a kind of meta collection of research. He calls it, the subtitle is The Facts Are Friendly. And he makes these points. He says that we think we have a good feel for client experiences, but the research shows that we're wrong. And he says that the therapist's rating of the therapeutic relationship is only moderately in agreement with the client's ratings. And that in 30 to 40%, therapists agree with clients on what was most significant in the sessions. It's only 30 to 40%. If you ask the clients what they thought was important, over half of them disagree with the therapist. That's quite a finding. His book is a collection of findings from research studies. So it's very interesting what he finds out. And he says that in the findings, therapists overemphasize the technical rather than the relational aspects of the work. He says that the research shows that therapists are often very poor at predicting outcome. And that therapists invariably or largely tend to overestimate their effectiveness relative to other therapists. There's one study that found that 90% of therapists put themselves in the top 25% of service delivery. So most of us think we're brilliant.
Is that Scott Miller?
I haven't written down the reference actually, but it might be. Yeah. So it's not enough to say to a commissioning agency, I really think you should employ me because I know what I do is helpful. But there is a lot of strong research support for certain positive therapy findings. There's a lot of research that shows that therapy is helpful, that it is useful, and knowing this really helps us to be more confident in applying for jobs and promoting our work. And obviously, some modalities are very good at doing this, and they're the ones that get the jobs in the state sector. Does that matter? We ask ourselves, does it matter? Well, when we discuss this, because it's a lot of work to do a research study, and you have to sort of get motivated. And when we ask ourselves, does it really matter? Do we really need to do this? What we came up against were serious political and ethical issues that we felt really mattered about the rights of people, irrespective of their financial status, to access relational therapy, and to do it at sites of greatest availability. So this isn't an issue, really, if you're only going to work in private practice, but only certain clients can avail themselves of private therapy. So really, the debate we felt was about, was Gestalt a good therapy? Yes, of course we thought it was. And therefore, could we make a case for it being available for people that couldn't afford to pay? And if you can have money, you can pay for anything, any kind of therapy you want. But we wanted people to be able to have access to Gestalt and to argue the case for it, that this wasn't some kind of weird alternative therapy, but actually something mainstream, something that really helped people in a relational way. And as was mentioned yesterday, one of the things that you're up against in doing this kind of research, and certainly in the UK, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, often called NICE, is the body that decides what treatments are going to be sanctioned. And it's quite a conservative, rightly so, it's quite a conservative body. And it's making decisions on clinical medical treatments as well as other kinds of treatments, psychological therapy. And their position is that random controlled trials is the gold standard, that that's how you prove whether a treatment is worth supporting. And of course, drug companies have huge amounts of money. So, this is a political thing. So the huge amounts of money, not only to do the studies they do, but also to control the information that comes out. However, there has been a lot of work done, discussions with NICE, and what they're also saying is that even though random controlled trials is what they really want, that hermeneutic single case efficacy design case studies are also very significant, and Phil was talking about this yesterday, and also studies that are supplemented by client experience and cohort studies. And CORE outcome measurement is a cohort study. It studies what happens where clients were when they started treatment and where they end up at the end. So Mick Cooper and other people trying to address this problem, this gap between support, support for a therapy service and being able to practice. They suggest practically what can you do? You can enroll for a research program, get trained up in research methods. You can collaborate with other academics in the field, like you're doing in Sweden, which is a really good move. You can evaluate your work, and CORE seemed to be a really good way of evaluating our work. And you can join a practitioner research network. And a practitioner research network is what we set up in the UK, which really means a group of people that are interested in the same thing and working together to do the research. So I'm going to tell you a bit about how it went, what we did. This is, some of you will have seen this, and if you haven't, you can email me and I can send it to you. And this is what we found out. So just a shortcut, usually you have to read a long article to find out. So this is what we found out. This is what the sort of information you get from a project like CORE. So actually, a really high proportion of the data sets that we work with showed recovery or improvement. And nobody got worse. And we were able to say with some conviction that Gestalt therapists appeared to be as effective as other therapists working in primary care. And this was because a lot of our data came from people working in primary care. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And when we wrote up our findings, we were able to compare what we had found out with 4 other major studies, and most of them were in primary care. So in a nutshell, this is our findings. So just a bit about CORE. I think somebody wants to come in. So those of you who are not familiar with CORE, this is just to show what it stands for, Clinical Outcomes in Routine Evaluation. It's shortened to CORE, and the OM stands for Outcome Measurement. So it's a practice, it provides practice-based evidence. It's seen as a valid and reliable measure for multiple settings. So it works, and certainly in our sample, we had people who are working in primary care, in private practice, in the secondary sector, in voluntary organisations, in education, in schools. And it's acceptable to users. It's not that intrusive. It's accepted by clinicians. It's got a huge database. And it's accepted by policymakers. It has a good reputation. It's one of the most widely used measures in the NHS. It's not the only one, but it's one of the ones that's used quite widely, very widely in the UK. And one of its strengths is it has this huge database. Because it's been used by, and this was a few years ago, 50,000 data sets held, electronically, so very searchable. It's got a lot more now. And this is one of its strengths. And when you do a small project like ours was, our statistics feed into this national database, and we're also able to compare our statistics with the national database, which is like a benchmark. So you can see, actually, for what it is, it's a very powerful comparative tool. So what it is, what is it? It's 5 items, and I've sent you these, so some of you downloaded them, and otherwise you'll have them on your computers. So the admin checklist is just a piece of paper that lists all the forms, and you use it to make sure that you've got a complete data set, because one of the issues is that you don't have a complete set of data, then that can't be used in your study. And this is there's a number of difficult things that you have to pay attention to when you're collecting this kind of data, and that's one of them, is to have complete sets. Then the patient questionnaire is the one we're going to be working with later, and that's a 34-item questionnaire, tick box questionnaire, which is administered at the beginning of therapy, so before you see the client, and at the end of therapy when you finish seeing them. And then there's 2 forms that are filled in by the therapist. And these, again, they're tick box forms. They can be computer read, although we didn't do that. We filled them in manually. So we're not going to be looking at those today, but you can look at them. And they collect a range of data. And what's interesting is they collect the modality of the therapist, but they don't have Gestalt therapy on them. And so that's another reason why we wanted the Gestalt community to have a distinct, so it's got other, so of course we all put Gestalt, so that we had a data set that was distinctly Gestalt, or done by Gestalt therapists anyway. So what this is measuring, this is the sort of heart of the measurement. These 34 questions, which we'll be looking at, the client fills in themselves based on the past week. How have they felt in the past week? And they have a scale, and you'll see it in a minute. And these questions are, they're interesting. They're based on these 4 criteria: problems, well-being, functioning, and risk. There's 4 questions on risk, and actually that's one of the very immediately useful to the therapist uses of the form, because you can immediately see whether your client has scored high for risk, so it can be used instantly as a risk assessment form, apart from the data, the outcome measurement aspect of it. So what we did, we formed this Gestalt Practice Research Network. We had meetings. We went to conferences that were already happening and talked with people about the idea. People were very keen to do research, but again, it's quite difficult to move from people being keen to do research to being really motivated to participate. When you use CORE, it was developed as a project at Leeds University, and now it's a company, but it's not a. They don't charge for the forms like a lot of psychological measurements do, but you need to process the data. You need a license. It's not that expensive, but it is a cost, and so GPTI, the Gestalt Psychotherapy Training Institute, is one of the larger Gestalt organisations in the UK, funded the license fee for us. And in practice, we had to actually physically put it on a computer. So it sat on my computer in my study, the software. And what we actually did was that people came from time to time and entered in the data sets manually that had been sent to my office. So it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. We made it fun, so we would have sort of parties where people would turn up and we'd have lunch, and people would support each other. It was quite good to do it in pairs because someone could, it's terribly boring. This sort of number crunching is at the heart of a lot of research that needs data to be dealt with. And it's really boring. It's really dull. and it's really repetitive, and it's not at all sexy, and in itself it's not at all relational. But as But as Gestalt therapists, of course, you can make it relational, which is what we did. So we had a lot of fun doing this. And, you know, friendships were built up, and long-standing memories were formed as we... and cake was eaten. And we got through it. And, you know, if you're funded, if you're working in a university, if you've got research funds, then you can pay someone to do it for you, or you can pay to have the version that scans it on the computer. And maybe that's what you're going to be doing in Sweden. And that's wonderful, but, you know, it doesn't mean that if you don't have resources to that kind of money, and a lot of us don't in the Gestalt community, doesn't mean that you can't do it. You can creatively adjust and find ways and means, and this is what we did. So, this is the sort of the backstory I'm giving you, right? This is what it's really like. Because this is what you need to know if you're going to do something like this. And so eventually we got about 40 therapists registered. They had to register because we had to know who they were, and we had to make up instructions, tell them how to do it, what to do, how to do it. We made up codes because there's room on the forms to put in codes, site codes, therapist codes, and so we were interested to know how experienced the therapists were. Were they students? How long post-qualifying? We made up codes for that kind of thing. And we also wanted to know what setting they were working in. So we made up codes for whether they were working in primary care, whether they were working in school, whether they were working in secondary sector, or so on, in private practice. So that was useful. So we were able to collect that kind of data and customize the forms in that way. And eventually, for us, from setting up to finishing, it was actually a 3-year period. And we collected 180 complete data sets. We collected more data sets, but these were the complete ones. It doesn't sound a lot, but, you know, it was a lot of work. And it was what it was. Now, what's really interesting is that a lot of people from European countries have been interested. There's a lot of interest in CORE, and partly since we wrote the article, really. And so there's a lot of translation going on. I think Norwegian was the first, but there's a lot of these are the ones that have been done and finished, and these are the ones that are in progress or nearly done. Check there. And Chris Evans tells me that he's just done Dutch Sign Language, which he feels very proud of, which I should think he would. So this gives you a sense of the international flavour of this as a tool. Now, I mentioned Chris Evans. He's one of the team, the original team, that researched this measurement and put it together. Because obviously, to develop a measurement requires quite a lot of research to make sure that the samples and are valid. And so and if you look at the manual which I've sent you on the attachment, you'll see they break down how they've done the calculations. So the information is there. Now, Chris Evans is he's been working in the NHS as a psychiatrist, and he's semi-retired recently, and he's very involved ongoingly with CORE, and he's your guy, really. If you are interested in having CORE translated into a language it hasn't been translated into yet, this is the guy to contact. This is his contact email. He does CORE on Thursdays, he tells me. And the reason why it's important to get the translation done through this way is to make sure that it's on a parity with the original research behind it, so that you can't just make up your own questions or change the questions. They've got to, for it to be comparative, it's got to be sanctioned, really, and then he gets it tested and tried out, and then you can download it, just like you can the English version, which is great. So this next bit is a bit of nitty-gritty, really, about what you get from CORE. And what you get, one of the things you get is a graph. Can you see this? You might not see all the dots, but you get the idea. So you get this is obviously a scatter graph, and these are our final results. I think there's 135 dots. I'm not quite sure. I don't know, put it somewhere. 135 data sets here. And I'm going to deconstruct this for you in the next few slides, just so that you understand what we're looking at here. So the axes are the post-score, which means the score, the vertical axis is the score at the end of therapy, and the horizontal axis is the score at the beginning of therapy. So if the client hasn't changed, their scores haven't changed, they would be on this line, right? The diagonal line. That's the line for no change. And either side of that is change that's not significant, not statistically significant. So the dotted tram lines, if the score is within that section, you can't be conclusive as to whether the change has been helpful or not. The scores are slightly different for males and females because of the findings from the sample population. And what CORE does is to divide the population into clinical and non-clinical. So clinical are clients whose scores fall below a particular level. And from the research that they did, they deem these to be clinical, i.e. measurably depressed or anxious, or clinical in terms of dysfunction. So that's quite interesting, because are we working with people who are basically functional and, to do with anxieties, life problems, what's sometimes disparagingly called the worried well? Or are we working with people who have a considerable degree of dysfunction and dis-ease, and on those categories of the well-being and problems in life and so on? That's quite interesting to know, I think. So this is where the cutoff falls for the scores before therapy. And this is where the cutoff falls for the scores at the end of therapy on the other axis. Are you with me? And the terminology in CORE, they talk about reliable and clinical change. So here, this isn't our final results. This was an interim graph that we did halfway through. And you can see that there are no dots in the upper part of the graph. So what it's showing is that there's no clients who have deteriorated. It shows that all the clients in this sample have improved, or they haven't changed. They might not have changed, but they haven't got worse. Red dots and blue dots for men and women. And this is another way of looking at it. And this is about reliability. So, so the pink section, if anyone was in there, you could say that they had reliably deteriorated. And the other section, that people have reliably improved. The dots that are in the tram lines up the middle, you can't say that because they're statistically, you can't count them one way or another. So you can't count, they're not in the reliable bit. That's what that's showing. So you can only count the dots that are below the lower dotted line. Yes?
I'm sorry, Christine, I'm not so used to understanding or decoding these. When you talk, could you explain what is what on the chart, how to read it? Because
Yeah.
maybe I feel a bit stupid.
Well, you're not stupid. It's not my natural way of looking at things either. Some people it is. So, and the rest of us, we have to sort of get our head around it. But it's quite powerful if we can. So the bit that shows up quite red means there's no dots in there. So it means that nobody's got worse, right? Because that diagonal line that goes across, if they're above that, it would mean it's the line of change. If they're above that, it would mean they'd got worse, and if it's below it, it means they'd got better. But if they're in the middle bit that's white, it's not statistically significant. You can't actually say they belong to one bit or the other. Okay? And this is about getting, being accurate about what your data is. This is the sort of thing you get into when you do a sort of quantitative study. You have to make sure that the bits you're counting as the claims you're making, that you're accurate about it. I mean, if you do CORE, you wouldn't all necessarily have to get to grips with this, but I'm just unpacking it a bit so that you kind of see the sort of information that you get and the sort of information that you don't get. In a way, it doesn't matter if you don't completely get it now, because you can look at the slides, but it's just to give you the feel of it, really, before we sort of get to grips with it in a different way in a minute. Okay, so that's another way of showing. So there's 75 clients, 69%. This is what you can say, clients that showed reliable improvement.
Christine?
Yes.
It would be very interesting to compare 69% improvement with the latest research results from the IAP program.
Yes, it would. It would be a good piece of work to do.
Well, we know what it is. It was just published in therapy.net. And the IAP is the Improving Access to Psychological Therapy. So it's the government project to get therapy to 900,000 people in the UK, and they threw £300 million at this project in 2008. And it was evidence-based, and therefore it was exclusively CBT. at the beginning. And they just published their first set of figures themselves. And of the 900,000, they've actually reached 400,000. The cost is 3 times more than they originally predicted. And the positive outcomes were reported 12%. If you had heart surgery, would you have heart surgery if the doctor said there was a 12% chance of success? Or 69% is amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Yeah.
Therapy.net.
Therapy.net. Thank you, Ken. Anyway, I'm just looking at these graphs because I have a sense that people are struggling a bit with this, and I sort of wanted to sort of unpack where you get to, but maybe you've got the idea. Maybe we've done enough with these graphs. What do you think? Mark?
Why don't you, can you just point your finger on the graph and show where people are at the beginning, and move your finger up the graph to show where people are at the end, and then people get a sense of how each dot is formed.
You do it for me. Can you do it for me? So what Mark's asked me to do is to sort of show you how people might move. So I don't know, it might be a bit confusing on this one because the people are already plotted, aren't they? But and it might make more sense when you've done your own score. Maybe you could do your score and put yourself on the graph. But you might get so this is where you might come. You'd have a score at the beginning of therapy along this line. So it's a mean score. You'll see how it's worked out. So it'll be from 0 to 4. So if your score at the beginning of therapy is less than 1 point something, depending whether you're a man or a woman, you would be down here, which would mean that you were beneath the cut-off line for being in the clinical population. That's right, isn't it? And then when this score is showing where you would be at the end of therapy. So if you were, and this is the cut-off line for at the end of therapy. And what you can see here is that it doesn't work because it's sort of, anyway. I'm not sure I can explain it very easily from this, but I think what we'll do is do your scores, and then you can see how they would work. Should you explain it better? No. What this actual slide shows is reliable and clinical improvement. Oops. So, okay, so what I think we'll do is leave these graphs for now. We can come back to them with your questions. I think what we need to do is have a go with the form, and then we can put it back together. I think that would be better, because otherwise it's a bit abstract. And bit difficult to interpret. So quite a few of you have got the measurements, haven't you? The 34 question measurement. Yes. Perhaps we could have a look. Who hasn't got them? There's some here. You need both. This is not shown there. You need one of each. Is there not enough?
No, because there's more of these here.
Oh, some people, I think there should be enough, the same of each. So, there's one there.
Lovely. So we share them, don't we?
I think you'll have to share. I think what you can do, I think what people can do is to answer the questions on a bit of paper.
Yeah.
You can put number one and put the,
Multiply it. So
yeah. Okay, so if you actually haven't got your own version of it, how many people haven't actually got one themselves right now? If you actually haven't got one yourself, what you can do is share with someone, and you could write down the number. You can sort of improvise. You can write the number and then the number of your answer. You with me? What you just need to be able to see is the questions. Can anybody not see the questions? Talk to me. So this is the 34 questionnaire. Can anybody not see one? Put your hand up. If you can't see one, you need to be beside someone who has got one. And you can write down, answer one, what your score is, which number it is. Can you do that? So imagine that you are a new client, that you're sitting in the waiting room, and that you've been given this form. And you read the question, and you tick a box. And it's based on your experience over the last week. Yeah, let's do this, and then I'll show you. It'll become obvious when we do it.
The cut-off score.
Yes, I will in a minute. Let's go through the exercise, and then you can see where your cut-off is. I'll show you. We'll go through it.
Are there signs of pathology?